Hello, Christ Church. My name is Paul Fowler. I serve as our Lake Forest campus pastor, and I am glad to be sharing with you through the book of Psalms, and specifically, we're going to be looking at Psalm 90 today. If you've never read Psalm 90, one of the interesting things about it is that it is written by Moses, or at least it is attributed to him. And the reason that we know that is before verse 1 in Psalm 90, it has a superscript. So before the words come, a subscript is after everything comes. So a superscript, it says, a prayer of Moses, the man of God. And what I love about this psalm is how Moses kind of takes us on a journey of what I feel like is his relationship with God and really what he is thinking about in his life. And to somewhat kind of zoom out, we got to understand a little bit about Moses and who he is. And to do that, actually, we can go to Acts chapter 7, where the prophet Stephen is going to be telling a story about Moses as he tries to share the larger picture of the gospel. And what he says about Moses is Moses' life is in thirds. He spends the first third of his life, the first 40 years, being in Egypt. And part of it, he has 3 months where Moses is put into the Nile because the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and so they had become so large that all the babies were to be thrown into the Nile so that they were drowned. And what happens is Moses' parents have a creative way of putting him in the Nile in this basket of reeds, and then Pharaoh's daughter actually finds him and takes him out of the water. That's what his name Moses means, to be drawn out. And so then he spends these first 40 years of his life living in the palace, being Pharaoh's daughter's child, so to speak. And then what happens is he sees this Egyptian taskmaster beating one of the Israel slaves, and he ends up killing that person in defense of this Israel slave. And what happens next is he runs off into the wilderness because word gets around that this has happened, and he's afraid of what's going to happen to him. And then he spends 40 years, according to Stephen in Acts chapter 7, living in the wilderness. In Midian, he is a shepherd. And in Psalm 90, what you see later on is that Moses is talking about our life might be 70 or 80 years. And so he's probably in his 60s or 70s when he's writing this prayer, Psalm 90, considering his life and what's it mean and who is he supposed to be. And some people want to place it that he is writing it later when he is 40 years in the wandering of the wilderness with the people out of Egypt. But I like placing it here, having no clue that he's about to go and see this burning bush, who knows, days or weeks after he wrote this psalm. So what's in Moses' mind? What is he thinking of? Whether it's 80 or 120, it doesn't change anything. And I want to read Psalm 90, verse 1 through 6, and just kind of make some points along the way as we walk through this. Verse 1 says, Lord, you've been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. So what we see in verse 1 or 2 is that Moses is talking about how God is the creator. So before the mountains were born, you brought forth everything into the world. That God is everlasting. He is the creator and he is infinite. That's what we get from verse 1 and 2. Then we see in verse 3, it says, you turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. In verse 3 there, you see these quote marks around return to dust, you mortals. That's because that's from Genesis 3, verse 19. This is the curse. Adam and Eve eat off the tree. God comes and says, where are you? What have you done? And they hide from him. And he says, because of that, I created you from dust. We see that in Genesis 1 and 2. But now you're going to return to dust. And this is what happens. When we get old and we die, our bodies turn to dust. And so he is saying, we are the created. We are finite. We are the creation of God. Moses says in verse 4 then, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. So it goes that quickly for God. And what comes next? Verse 5, yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. The word there for sweep in verse 5 is actually swept in the sense of swept away in a flood. So this is basically going back to the flood account that happens in Genesis. Humanity has become so sinful, God pronounces his judgment and everyone is swept away in the flood. And what we see, it continues on there, they are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. That's how quickly our lives are. So we'll stop there for today. And what I want you to think about today is, how do you see God as the infinite creator in your own life? Maybe just as you're walking around today, you see creation, you see everything that God has made. And how do we realize that we are the finite created beings? We're those that will turn to dust. And we'll see tomorrow how embracing our own mortality really helps us understand who God is and what he's done for us. But take some time today and acknowledge that God is your infinite creator. And what does that mean for you?